Thank you all so much for that wonderful panel. A lot of what they were saying reminded me of a very interesting quote about Bitcoin, which is that Bitcoin is everything you don't know about computers combined with everything that you don't know about money. And that's one of the reasons it's so important that we have conferences like this. So we've got another panel coming up as a next part of the presentation. So I'd like to welcome two of my good friends, Roger Huang of Block Rewards, and he's also the author of Would Mao Hold Bitcoin, a wonderful Bitcoin book that I highly recommend everyone go check out in the exhibitor hall. And I'd also like to welcome Kitt from Netcoins to come up. We are going to be talking about what I would argue are some of the most misunderstood technologies in the digital asset space. I would argue they're dangerously misunderstood. And that is the topic of both central bank digital currencies, or CBDCs, as well as stablecoins. So let's give a round of applause for Mike and Roger joining me on stage right now.
Hey everyone, welcome to this panel on WTF are CBDCs and stablecoins. I'm sure if you're here, you must be wondering about that topic. And thankfully, we've got two really good experts on the topic. And we're just going to start off easy peasy. Zach, why don't you tell us a little bit what a CBDC is?
Yeah, well, thank you for hosting the panel, Roger. Yeah, so a CBDC, central bank digital currency, that's what the acronym stands for. I notice a lot of the time in my work at the Human Rights Foundation, where we're kind of talking to a lot of people that are not necessarily very accustomed to this new wave of digital currencies and all the different forms of digital currencies, if you will. You know, we have Bitcoin, really the first, the one that set the standard and the only one that truly is of importance today. But you also have things like stablecoins and central bank digital currencies and meme coins and all of these other cryptocurrencies that are claiming to do all these things. And so for someone new who's coming into the space, they look at this and it's very difficult to differentiate between all of these different digital assets. That being said, the important distinction you have to make when it comes to a central bank digital currency is that a CBDC is a direct liability of a central bank. So it is basically, you can think of a CBDC as a digital version of a country's fiat currency. So you could think of a CBDC as a digital version of the Canadian dollar or a digital version of the US dollar. And the really important distinction here is that it is a direct liability of that nation's central bank. So it would be a direct liability of the Bank of Canada or of the Federal Reserve. And what that means is that you are banking and saving and transacting directly with the central bank without any layer of abstraction in between. So no other private financial institution like a commercial bank that you might be used to banking with. Instead, you're banking directly with the central bank. And what the concern there is that raises a lot of risks for financial freedom, civil liberties, human rights, because you're basically putting the absolute monetary authority directly in the hands of a central bank and, by extension, the government, and giving them a tool to fine-tune and granularly control people's financial activity.
Love that description. Very, very comprehensive. Mike, we turn it over to you for stablecoins.
Yeah, that's a really good description, Zach. So stablecoins are a very interesting tool. They've been around for almost 10 years now, and they actually originally started as more of a trading technology. So early on, when people were on Bitcoin exchanges, they obviously, there's a lot of volatility in Bitcoin when it's priced against US dollars, and people wanted to trade it against something. And fiat currencies have traditionally been really hard to use and transact with on exchanges. So a company came up with the idea of, oh, why don't we just make a digital US dollar that people can trade against with their Bitcoin? So that original company was Tether, and they issued USDT. And over time, they've actually evolved. I don't think they really realized what they were creating at the time, but it's turned into a tool that's very similar to just a digital currency. So People can use US dollars generally, or what they are, and they're transacted on a bunch of different cryptocurrency chains. And their real goal is to provide something that is a stable store of value on different chains. So the biggest ones that you probably hear about are USDT, USDC, and really they kind of look like a currency on different chains. Bitcoin hasn't really adopted them as much as some of the other things like Ethereum or Solana, but they are certainly coming. And yeah, they're pretty interesting, to be honest, because they are sort of starting to look like a replacement to the wire system. A lot of people are using them for remittances and even just day-to-day spending. But traditionally, they really stay in the cryptocurrency ecosystem for people to trade between things like Bitcoin and Ethereum back into US dollars without having to go back into the traditional banking system.
So why don't we, Zach, take your definition of the CBDC, and if you could sum that up in one line, why a CBDC is different from Bitcoin?
Well, and I think, too, it's important here to differentiate between the CBDC and stablecoins, because the descriptions we gave sound sort of similar, right? Like,
okay,
we're using these words, digital currency.
Yeah.
So, I mean, like we were saying, like Mike shared there, like a stablecoin is a digital currency, but it's issued by a private company. It's a digital version of the US dollar or the Canadian dollar issued by a private company. It is highly regulated and backed one-to-one with that fiat currency. The difference with a stablecoin and a CBDC is that a CBDC, instead of having a private company issuing that digital currency, you would have the central bank or government doing so. So the stablecoins, a lot of people like to say that they're like CBDCs in disguise, but there is an important distinction of having that layer of abstraction, that intermediary, which is the company issuing the stablecoin. But to bring it back to what you were asking, Roger, what is the difference between Bitcoin and a central bank digital currency? Well, the difference is extremely stark. In fact, I would argue that Bitcoin and CBDCs exist on two opposite sides of the spectrum. Central bank digital currencies are provided by a central authority. They're permissioned. They're programmable to be able to restrict how you save, where you spend your money, how much time you have to spend your money, how much you can spend on any given thing, what you can spend your money on. All of these are possible with a central bank digital currency because they're centralized, programmable, and provided by a financial body. Whereas with Bitcoin, it is a market-provided digital currency. It is permissionless, so anyone can use it. As I remarked in the opening remarks, it doesn't care who you are, where you're from, what you believe in, or why you're using it. You can use Bitcoin if you have an internet-connected device, and sometimes even without the internet, as we're seeing. And so the real difference here is Bitcoin provides financial freedom because anyone can use it for whatever they need it to be, and this is really important for activists and dissidents who are operating under authoritarian regimes or pushing back against dictators, whereas something like a central bank digital currency would be the tool that the dictator would want to use to exert financial control over a population. But Bitcoin is the opposite, where it's the tool for the individual to financially free themselves from that situation.
Awesome. Or not so awesome, but, awesomely described. So I think let's bring this a little bit to the context of where we are right now. Obviously, we're in beautiful sunny Vancouver today. And so just trying to figure out, what does all this discussion mean for the Canada-US context? And I'm specifically going to bring up two topics. Obviously, the Bank of Canada itself has been going back and forth on whether or not it would issue a central bank digital currency, something incredibly relevant for all the Canadians in the audience. But the Trump administration has actually released an executive order that has said that the United States will not issue a central bank digital currency, right? So why don't we start off there a little bit? Like, what's going on with that in the latest? Maybe Zach, you're probably the person to talk a little bit about this, but then maybe Mike, you might.
Yeah, I can add a quick remarks. Well, one thing I will say is that if you ban the creation of a CBDC via an executive order, that can just be undone with another executive order when the next administration comes into power. So kind of irrelevant to some degree. I mean, it's good to say no to CBDCs, but it seems more like virtue signaling than anything else. In the context of Canada, a central bank digital currency is in the research phase. It was shelved prior to our election. But since the latest election and the election of Mark Carney from the Liberal Party, we have actually seen the resumption of central bank digital currency research here in Canada. I don't think this is a surprising trend at all, given that Mark Carney was the governor of both the Central Bank of Canada and the Central Bank of England. These are central banks, and we're talking about central bank digital currencies. There is a lot of overlap here. So we're kind of seeing a little bit of a pick back up in the exploration of CBDCs in Canada. So, yeah.
Yeah, Mark Carney, the first central banking free agent of our modern era. So, Mike, I'm wondering a little bit about your take on what's going on with stablecoins in the U.S. and Canada, and just kind of what you're seeing.
Yeah, I'll start with Canada because Canadian dollars haven't really taken off very much in the stablecoin space. There's a few companies working on it, but the US dollar is in much higher demand and it's being used more frequently. USDC is the main one. USDT effectively has been outregulated here, so most of the exchanges and companies can really just deal with Circle stablecoin. But what's happening in the US with stablecoins and how it relates to CBDCs is actually pretty interesting. And when you have that really specific definition of the central bank liability piece, sometimes it's easy to conflate, stablecoins, CBDCs, and that's a really, really important thing to focus on. And with that executive order effectively, banning CBDCs, it does somewhat seem like lip service, but it is interesting because in the States right now, there was an act that was just recently passed making some federal laws around stablecoins in the US and who can issue them. And most of the stablecoins now, how they function is they mostly hold US dollar treasuries. And the Treasury is under, in the US government, it's under the president as part of like the executive branch. And even though it's not part of the central bank, it's starting to look like it will be used as a political tool to, push the United States' aim. What I'm seeing is generally, it seems like the Trump administration wants the US dollar to be more widespread across the world, and they want to devalue their currency. They want to have more industrialization in the US, and they want to, it seems like, use stablecoins to achieve that. And one of the really key pieces about, central bank digital currencies versus stablecoins and CBDCs, the part that I think we really care about is, can someone censor you? Can someone stop you from doing these transactions? And with Bitcoin, of course, no one can. And whether it's a CBDC or a stablecoin, they do have those features. They're programmable, and we have seen even Tether, which I would argue kind of started more as a Bitcoin adjacent type product. It was more freedom oriented. We are starting to see them now censor transactions, so they are starting to come closer to that CBDC look. And even when you look at the acronym USDC, CBDC, it's kind of hard to think that they aren't starting to look like the same product. So there's some wordsmithing there, but we do have to be cognizant of what these tools do and how they really differ from Bitcoin and why it's important for people to use Bitcoin over the long term instead of these, centralized products that are basically just bank/political tools in the long term.
Yeah, so we've had a little bit of a view into the Canada-US context, but of course, this discourse, Bitcoin, central bank digital currencies, and stablecoins, this is happening across the world. I'm going to turn it to you first, Zach, but I'd love to hear, what's happening around the world, especially since, we live in a place in North America, which is a very different context from the rest of the world, just to set some framing. So, for example, China and other countries like China have gone from using cash almost exclusively to almost leapfrogging past North America to using mobile payments first, right? And this is ripe for central bank digital currencies to step into the void. So just kind of curious, leapfrogging a little bit on that, Zach, what are you seeing kind of internationally? Of course, you're at the Human Rights Foundation. You're writing newsletters, you're kind of updating the CBDC tracker, which is a great resource, by the way, on this. So what's going on kind of globally? What are some stories that you think might resonate?
Yeah, it's not good. Over 139 jurisdictions around the world are exploring a central bank digital currency to some degree. So nearly half the global population lives under an authoritarian regime exploring a CBDC. And as I said, this is of great concern to financial freedom, to human rights and civil liberties and financial privacy, and even democracy itself, I would argue. But there are many vivid examples of CBDCs already launched around the world, and they offer a really intriguing view into what a CBDC means for everyday people. So one of my favorite ones to bring up is actually in Thailand. And this is sometimes surprising people. This surprises people because when they think of Thailand, they're thinking of like a nice tourist destination. But this is Thailand with a twist. Basically, what they have done is the government has introduced a government-run app, and it's quite literally just on your phone. And it is functioning as a de facto CBDC. And what they're doing is for the last year, they've been giving handouts, free money to people. All you got to do is download the app and you get the free money. You get the free CBDC. It's a pretty intriguing proposition, especially if you're in a country where you're dealing with a high cost of living, where your wages are not keeping up with the rate of inflation, or you're living in a country with crushing poverty and things like this. And so what was most interesting about this CBDC app that Thailand released is that it came with very strict restrictions. So it could only be spent in your local area. It had a 6-month expiration, so you had to spend the money within 6 months of receiving it. You could only spend it on approved vendors and goods. So, you were not going to be able to go and buy cigarettes and alcohol with the CBDC. Sorry. Say goodbye to your vices. You won't have them anymore under a CBDC world. But the point is like these tools come with immense restrictions around how people get to spend their money, and it also gives the government unprecedented level of surveillance over people's individual financial activity. And Thailand is not the only example. India is another really great example, actually. They are massively expanding their CBDC as of late. What they're doing is actually a much smarter kind of tactic to introduce the CBDC. They are embedding it into existing digital payment networks that they already have going. Most prominently being the Unified Payments Interface, UPI. It's a state-created digital payment rail in India. It's one of the most widely used digital payment systems in the world, if not the. And what Indian officials are doing is that they are embedding the central bank digital currency into that. So people already using this digital rail, which is very popular and many people are already using, are inadvertently being onboarded and pushed into a central bank digital currency. So this is a way to gain greater adoption, because many CBDCs have struggled to gain significant adoption, like in China, because people either, some distrust in the government, but also because a lot of these CBDCs are trying to create their own new network instead of leveraging other networks, which I think India was kind of learning from the mistakes of places like China and Nigeria, where adoption has struggled, and are now trying a different approach, and it seems to be working. So yeah, there's countless other examples. Like I said, I highly recommend checking out the CBDC tracker from the Human Rights Foundation. It's an interactive global map where you can look at any country in the world and examine the state of the central bank digital currency that they are either working on, or if they're not working on it, or how far along they are, and also the context within, what does it mean for political freedom and financial freedom and human rights in the broader context of that country. So I highly recommend people check out HRF's CBDC tracker. You can find that at hrf.org/CBDC tracker. But yeah.
Awesome. And I just wanted to quickly, because I was actually one of the first writers to write about central bank digital currencies for Forbes in 2019, 2018. We wrote a book about China, which obviously has the world's most advanced central bank digital currency. And I think, just two kind of case studies of why this matters, because lest we forget, Hal Finney and the cypherpunks, they envisioned a world where Bitcoin could help us hedge against central banks controlling the currency even more minutely than they do now. Because, of course, with the private banking system, that's more of a wholesale approach. But with CBDC specifically, you get down to a central bank can drill down to individual users and manipulate your behavior. So just two quick stories. One is that in China, when they came out with the pilots, they actually made the funds expirable. So of course, you can imagine a world where they just expire your funds for any number of actions you take. And the second is that Zach mentioned Nigeria. The central bank governors there actually tried to push through the CBDC, even though there were riots and unrest because of it. They were trying to demonetize some of the cash reserves that were out there. So it just shows like how adamant central banks are in kind of adopting this behavior. But you know, I want to switch tact a little bit, and I think one of the really critical differences for Bitcoin between these two things that we talked about is that Bitcoin is a protocol. It's not a platform. And why that's important is because platforms imply leadership, imply people at the very top. And so I think for stablecoins, I'd love to kind of delve into this history, and maybe Mike, you can bring that to us, right? Like, what is kind of some of that history behind Circle and Tether, who are two of our largest issuers that are headed up by human beings as opposed to protocols of nodes?
Yeah, well, they both come from a central issuer. So USDT, Tether, originally came from the Bitfinex exchange and a couple people that worked there, and it morphed into its own company called Tether. So it's really controlled by a small group of people. There's 100 employees approximately. Ironically, they're one of the most profitable companies in the world right now because of how big they are. So essentially, their business is pretty simple, and how it works is pretty basic. So they will issue a digital US dollar on a bunch of different chains, whether that's Solana, Ethereum, etc. And they'll take that digital dollar, they'll go to somewhere else, and they'll purchase generally US dollar debt. So there's a few people that basically are able to see everything that happens on the chain, and they can stop things from happening when they see fit. It hasn't really happened for quite a long time up until this point, but recently we're starting to see more and more transactions being censored, whether it's mostly for things like hacks, or there's the OFAC list, those types of things. And then Circle, very similar.
Mike, what is the OFAC list for people who don't know?
The Office of Financial Asset Control in the U.S. Essentially, they publish a list of bad actors that you can't send funds to at the end of the day. Circle, very similar story, came from a group called Circle Internet Group. They're now public, and they essentially function very similar to USDT. USDT, I think they always came from a little bit more of a cypherpunk background, and they wanted to make this open source and usable everywhere in the world. We wouldn't really censor it, but the incentive structure is now that these are such large businesses. They're worth, they're issuing hundreds of billions of dollars. The issuers want to make money, and they're going to comply with the biggest financial regulator in the world, which is the United States. Recently, Trump had a lot of the CEOs on stage and was kind of calling them out personally, and kind of congratulating them on this great product that they built. But when you have these figureheads and these individuals that are malleable, they have their own incentives. They're going to make decisions that make the most sense for their own businesses and their own interests. Whereas something like Bitcoin, it's just everybody that's participating in the network and the code that really matters. And what like I mentioned before, what we really care about is making sure that these things are not censorable, and they're ours to use how we see fit from a protocol level. And it's your choice if you want to use a stablecoin versus Bitcoin, but at least we have something that we can opt into, like Bitcoin, that's outside of these networks. As they get closer and closer to sort of the regulated kind of financial system that we already see, Bitcoin's starting to and continuing to shine as just this unstoppable beast that everybody wants a piece of.
Yeah, I mean, Tether, that's one of those stats. Like, there's a good Chinese proverb, maybe we live in interesting times, and Tether is the second most profitable company in the world per employee. The first is actually OnlyFans, fun fact. But I kind of, Tether has been really interesting because specifically, they have been integrating with the Bitcoin ecosystem. They are funding Ocean Mining Pool. They are now available to be used on the Lightning Network with Taproot assets, so you can actually transfer value in Tether on Bitcoin. And they have an incredible hold on the Trump administration. The Secretary of the Treasury is actually used to be the person who held all their treasuries in trust. And so just an incredible story when you pierce through these details. So just going a little bit beyond the beyond that veil, you can quickly start seeing these really interesting patterns. So I'm going to have one final question, then we're going to have final parting thoughts. And this final question is a little bit specific, but Zach, we're gonna hit it to you. And if you were to really sum it up, like what is kind of the difference between right now we have these Canadian dollars that are circulating, these little, monopoly money, multicolored bills. What's the difference between that and a central bank digital currency?
There's a very big difference. So the important thing to understand about CBDCs is that, one, they're digitally native. They would not have a cash equivalent. Like, they are sort of meant to function like cash, except they're digitally native and programmable. So the promise of them functioning like cash will probably be very short-lived. Another thing to really, important distinction here is that the stated goal of most of these central banks pursuing CBDCs is to phase out cash entirely. So central bank digital currencies are being introduced to replace cash. To replace cash, why do they want to replace cash? Because cash is actually one of the most powerful tools we have for financial freedom alongside Bitcoin. Because cash is bearer money and it's private. You can make transaction without being censored or surveilled when you use cash. A CBDC would be the total opposite. Every transaction you make could be censored and will be surveilled. And this comes back to like the importance of Bitcoin. Is Bitcoin preserves many of those benefits of cash in the digital realm, and so that's why Bitcoin is the best defense against central bank digital currencies.
Great. Well, so now let's, as we're wrapping up, Mike, what are some parting thoughts? And maybe like if somebody wants to follow what's going on with stablecoins, how would they do that?
Yeah, that's a good question. Probably on X. I mean, even just follow the Trump administration. They're talking about it all the time. I would say, is there any other place you'd follow stablecoins? Do you have any other recommendations?
I have recommendations?
Yeah.
I have a recommendation.
Okay, well,
Cornell University just is in the process of releasing the preliminary findings of their Global Bitcoin Adoption Index. This is a massive research undertaking that covers over 50 countries, 25,000 people, and 500 in-person interviews, and is the first time we've ever had a global research study on the adoption of exclusively Bitcoin and stablecoins. And so the findings are going to be coming out in 2026, but highly recommend following along. The Cornell Bitcoin Club is going to be publishing all of those findings on their website and on their Twitter account as well. So that's one way to kind of look at stablecoin adoption and why people are choosing stablecoins, why people are choosing Bitcoin, why they're choosing one or the other. It's going to be really interesting. So highly recommend people check that out.
I have a little bit of an odd recommendation, which is like find someone who's like in a country that desperately needs US dollars and just talk with them. Iran, Argentina, Turkey, China. These are the people who are actually using stablecoins. So if you want to get to know what's going on with stablecoins and how they're actually being used, get fresh on your Mandarin. No, I'm kidding. But like, I mean, you can, there's people in Nostr and other places you can kind of find these people.
Students as well. Canada has a large international community. Students are going to be big adopters of crypto, and they are already. They're using stablecoins to move money back and forth between home. Same with international workers. People that want to send money between here in Mexico, here in Philippines. They're using these on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, and so Zach, any final parting words? And yeah, you have 30 seconds to shill the newsletter and the tracker and everything else you want to shill.
I love shilling, yeah. No, HRF just does such amazing work around a lot of the central bank digital currency stuff. So I definitely recommend going to HRF's website and looking at what we're covering regarding central bank digital currencies, staying informed, because this really is a topic that merits your attention. It's dangerously misunderstood, and if we just sit around and let central banks create central bank digital currencies, you will watch your financial freedom disappear right before your eyes, and you won't be able to do much for it, but that is why we're adopting Bitcoin. So yeah, like my final thought would be CBDCs give governments granular control and surveillance over all of your financial activity, if that is what is adopted and what is pushed upon us. Whereas Bitcoin gives you financial freedom. So everyone needs to be thinking about this. It's a topic that is worth studying more. I recommend all of you go check out some resources on CBDCs and stablecoins. Learn what we're up against and learn about how Bitcoin can be used as a defense against that for true financial freedom.
Okay, that wasn't quite a shill. That was kind of like half a shill. So I will actually shill. I think the Human Rights Foundation has an amazing resource on the CBDC tracker, which is way better than the other CBDC trackers, which tend to be pro CBDC. Just FYI. So highly recommend you all check it out. And then there's also, of course, the Financial Freedom newsletter, which Zach writes. He's probably a little bit too shy to actually openly say that, but I think it's amazing content. And with that, I want to thank all of you for spending the time with us on this critical topic. I think hopefully that you'll have left a little bit more educated and a little bit more understanding of what CBDCs, stablecoins are in relation to our favorite topic, Bitcoin. Thank you.